Her son refused to use the school bus and started acting strangely whenever he had to go to school. One day, the mother finally had enough and decided to secretly follow behind. And what she discovered shattered her world completely. Emma Wilson stood in her kitchen on a Monday morning preparing breakfast for her family. Sunlight streamed through the white lace curtains, casting a warm glow over the oak table. The comforting aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the scent of buttered toast as she moved efficiently between the toaster and refrigerator. Her morning routine, typically a peaceful start to the day, felt slightly off-kilter as she glanced at her son. 6-year-old Tyler sat slumped in his chair, his khaki shorts rumpled, his usually bright eyes downcast. His cereal bowl remained untouched, milk slowly soaking the colorful loops into a soggy mess. Emma noticed his small fingers nervously fidgeting with the edge of his placemat, a habit that had emerged in recent weeks. "Not hungry this morning, sweetheart?" Emma asked, trying to keep her voice light despite the concern building inside her. Tyler pushed the bowl away with such deliberate slowness that Emma couldn't ignore the gesture. "I don't want to go to school today," he mumbled, his voice barely audible over the refrigerator's soft hum. Emma felt a familiar pang of worry. This was becoming a pattern, the reluctance, the lack of appetite, the shadows under his normally bright eyes. Most concerning were the nightmares that had him waking up screaming 3 nights this week and the bedwetting that had mysteriously returned after being resolved for nearly 2 years. She crouched beside Tyler's chair, bringing herself to his eye level, her face etched with motherly concern. The morning light highlighted the worry lines that had begun forming around her eyes, lines that hadn't been there just a month ago. "Honey, what's wrong?" Emma asked softly, resting her hand on his small shoulder. "You love school. Is someone being mean to you? Are the lessons too hard?" Tyler's shoulders rose in a half-hearted shrug as he avoided her gaze, his eyes fixed determinedly on the table. "I just don't feel good," he mumbled, picking at a scratch in the wooden tabletop. His voice was so quiet Emma had to lean closer to hear him over the ambient kitchen sounds. David Wilson lowered his newspaper with a rustle, checking his watch before taking a final swig of coffee. His crisp button-down shirt and neatly knotted tie contrasted with the casual atmosphere of the breakfast table. "We've been through this, Em," he said with a barely concealed sigh. "It's just adjustment difficulties with his new teacher." He folded his newspaper with precise movements, tucking it under his arm. "Mrs. Peterson can be strict, but she's good. All the parents say so." Emma straightened up, running a hand through her hair. "But what about the nightmares? The bedwetting? That started 3 weeks ago, right after—" David cut her off with a dismissive wave of his hand, already reaching for his briefcase propped against the counter. "All kids go through phases. Remember how he was afraid of the dark last year? We got him that nightlight, and after a week, he was fine." The finality in his tone suggested the conversation was over before it had really begun. Emma pressed her lips together, holding back the words she wanted to say. This felt different. The night fear had made sense. Many children went through that. But this progressive withdrawal, this growing dread of school, it felt wrong, like a warning bell she couldn't silence. Tyler excused himself quietly, sliding off his chair with none of his usual morning energy. Emma watched him shuffle down the hallway toward his bedroom, his small shoulders slumped forward as if carrying an invisible weight. The morning light cast long shadows behind him as he disappeared into his room to get his backpack, and Emma couldn't shake the feeling that those shadows seemed to cling to him in a way that made her heart ache. She remained in the doorway, watching the empty hallway long after Tyler had gone, her maternal instinct screaming that something was wrong. She just couldn't identify what it was. Yet. Emma walked Tyler to the bus stop, their breath forming small clouds in the crisp morning air. The sky was a clear, brilliant blue that contrasted sharply with the anxiety radiating from her son. Other parents and children gathered at the corner, their cheerful morning chatter creating a backdrop that only emphasized Tyler's unusual silence. Emma glanced down, noticing Tyler's hands trembling as he clutched his red lunchbox. His face was unnaturally pale, making his freckles stand out starkly against his skin. His forehead was creased with worry lines that seemed grotesquely out of place on a 6-year-old's face. Emma felt her own anxiety ratcheting up a notch. "Are you cold, honey?" she asked, though she knew the autumn morning wasn't chilly enough to cause such trembling. Tyler shook his head without looking up, his eyes fixed on the sidewalk. His knuckles were white around the handle of his lunchbox. The familiar rumble of an approaching engine drew Emma's attention to the street. The yellow school bus rounded the corner, its bright color a cheerful contrast to the bare autumn trees lining the street. The hydraulic brakes hissed loudly as the vehicle stopped in front of the waiting families. Emma felt Tyler's entire body stiffen beside her. His hand suddenly clamped around hers with surprising strength, his palm clammy against her skin. The doors folded open with a mechanical wheeze, revealing Mr. Buford, the bus driver. He was a heavy-set man with a balding head that gleamed under the bus's interior lights. His blue uniform shirt stretched across his broad chest, a laminated name badge pinned at his pocket. "Good morning, boys and girls," Buford called out, his voice booming in the quiet morning. His round face broke into a wide smile as he greeted the children, his appearance the very picture of a friendly neighborhood bus driver. A high-pitched sound escaped Tyler's throat, startling Emma. She looked down just as her son erupted into hysterical crying. His face reddened instantly, tears streaming down his cheeks as he backed away from the bus door. "I don't want to go! Please, Mom! Please don't make me!" Tyler screamed, his voice cracking with panic. He pulled away from Emma with such force that she momentarily lost her grip on him. He darted toward the bus but stopped at the steps, clinging to the metal handrail of the entrance, his body language a confusing mix of avoidance and compliance. The other parents turned to stare, their conversations halting abruptly. Emma caught several exchanged glances, some sympathetic, others clearly judgmental. A hot flush of embarrassment crept up her neck as she hurried to Tyler's side. Emma knelt beside Tyler, placing her hands gently on his shoulders. "Tyler, honey, what's wrong?" she asked, struggling to keep her voice steady. "You need to go to school. All your friends are waiting for you inside." She wiped tears from his cheeks with her thumb, acutely aware of the audience they had attracted. Mr. Buford leaned forward in his seat, his massive frame filling the driver's area. His expression was sympathetic, almost practiced in its understanding. "This happens sometimes," he said with easy confidence. "First-grade jitters? I think I know just the thing." He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out 2 brightly wrapped candies, extending them on his open palm. "Special treats for brave boys who ride my bus, and one for Mom, too, for being so patient." Buford held out one candy to Tyler, whose crying had reduced to hiccuping sobs at the sight of the colorful wrapper. The bus driver's voice shifted to a gentler tone. "I keep these for situations just like this," he explained to Emma with a conspiratorial wink. "Works every time." Tyler hesitated, then slowly reached for the candy, his small fingers carefully avoiding contact with Buford's large hand. His sobs quieted to occasional hiccups as he stared at the bright wrapper. "And if you get on the bus now," Buford continued in that same gentle voice, "I'll have another one waiting for you after school. How does that sound, buddy?" Emma watched as Tyler's resistance visibly faded, his focus entirely captured by the candy in his hand. The abrupt change in his demeanor was almost disorienting, from terror to tentative acceptance in mere seconds. Relief flooded through Emma as she accepted the offered candy with a grateful smile. "Thank you, Mr. Buford. That's very kind," she said, slipping the candy into her jacket pocket. "Please, call me Buford," he replied with a warm smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I've been driving this route for 20 years. I know how to handle the little ones." Something in his tone, perhaps the practiced ease, perhaps the familiarity, made Emma uncomfortable, but she dismissed the feeling, attributing it to gratitude for his intervention in what could have been a much more difficult morning. Tyler reluctantly climbed the steps onto the bus, casting one last glance back at Emma. His eyes were still red-rimmed, holding a mixture of resignation and something else Emma couldn't quite identify. The doors closed with a definitive hiss, and Emma raised her hand in a reassuring wave as the bus pulled away. She stood watching until the bright yellow vehicle disappeared around the corner, joining the stream of morning traffic. The candy felt strangely heavy in her pocket as an uneasy feeling settled in her stomach, a feeling she tried to dismiss as lingering embarrassment from Tyler's public meltdown. Emma remained rooted to the spot long after the other parents had left, staring down the now empty street as if it might offer answers to the questions swirling in her mind. The weight of the candy in her pocket seemed disproportionate to its actual size, a physical manifestation of her growing discomfort. Something felt wrong, but she couldn't articulate what, even to herself. A movement at the edge of her vision caught her attention. Melissa Sanchez still stood at the corner, her gaze fixed on the distant point where the bus had disappeared. Unlike the other parents who had quickly dispersed to their daily routines, Melissa seemed suspended in the moment, her expression troubled. Emma hesitated, then approached the woman cautiously. They'd exchanged pleasantries at school events and PTA meetings, but had never really had a substantial conversation. Melissa was always impeccably dressed, but today Emma noticed small details that seemed off. A missing earring, a coffee stain on her otherwise crisp blouse, dark circles under her eyes, partially hidden by concealer. "Everything okay?" Emma asked, startling Melissa out of her reverie. Melissa turned, momentarily confused, before forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, Emma, right? Just thinking," she said, shifting her weight from one foot to another. She glanced at her watch, an automatic gesture that seemed more habit than necessity. "Your son Oscar is in Tyler's class, right?" Emma ventured, trying to place the quiet, dark-haired boy she'd seen at school functions. Melissa nodded, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Yes, they sit at the same table. Mrs. Peterson mentioned they work well together on art projects." She glanced at her watch again, clearly preparing to end the conversation. Emma took a deep breath, deciding to take a chance. "Has Oscar been acting differently lately?" she asked, keeping her tone casual even as her heart beat faster at her own boldness. The effect was immediate. Melissa's forced smile vanished, replaced by an expression of such raw concern that Emma almost took a step back. "He's been so quiet lately," Melissa admitted, her voice dropping to just above a whisper. "Used to be such a chatterbox. We'd joke that we couldn't get him to stop talking at dinner. But now he barely speaks, just pushes his food around." She sighed heavily, seeming relieved to finally voice her concerns. "And his grades are dropping. His teacher called me about it yesterday. He's always been good at math, but now—" She trailed off, shaking her head. Emma felt a chill despite the morning warmth. The similarities to Tyler's behavior were too striking to ignore: the withdrawal, the change in academic performance, the anxiety. "Does he—" Emma hesitated, formulating her next question carefully. "Does he ever say he doesn't want to go to school? Or have nightmares?" Melissa's eyes widened slightly. "Both, actually. He's been having bad dreams, wakes up crying, and getting him on the bus is becoming a daily battle." She paused, studying Emma's face. "Why? Is Tyler going through something similar?" Emma offered a reassuring smile she didn't quite feel. "They're just kids growing up. Tyler throws tantrums about school, too. I think they all go through these phases," she said, trying to convince herself as much as Melissa. The explanation felt hollow even as she spoke it, but she didn't know what else to say. Melissa nodded quickly, seeming relieved by the simple explanation. "You're probably right. I'm overthinking things. My husband says I worry too much," she said with a self-deprecating laugh that held little humor. "He thinks I'm being paranoid, but mothers know when something's wrong, don't they?" Emma nodded, a silent understanding passing between them. Melissa checked her watch one final time, this time with genuine concern. "I should get going. I have a meeting in 20 minutes. Thanks for the chat, Emma. It's good to know I'm not the only one dealing with whatever this is." "Of course," Emma replied. "Maybe we can get the boys together for a playdate sometime? Might help them both." "I'd like that," Melissa said with a genuine smile, the first of their conversation. She handed Emma her phone, and they quickly exchanged numbers before parting ways. As Emma walked back to her house, her mind circled relentlessly around the coincidence. 2 boys on the same bus route, same class, both suddenly afraid of school, both experiencing nightmares and regressive behaviors, and both mysteriously late to class according to what Melissa had mentioned about the teacher's call. Emma tried to dismiss the connections as she approached her front door, inserting her key into the lock with perhaps more force than necessary. Coincidences happened all the time, especially with children the same age going through similar developmental stages. But the weight of the candy in her pocket seemed heavier than before, a small but insistent reminder that sometimes what looks like coincidence is actually a pattern waiting to be recognized. Emma returned home to find David preparing to leave for work, car keys jingling in his hand as he patted his pockets for his wallet and phone. The normality of the scene, her husband going through his daily routine, felt at odds with the unease churning inside her. She held up the candy Buford had given her, the bright wrapper catching the kitchen light. "Tyler had another meltdown at the bus stop," she said, leaning against the kitchen counter for support she didn't realize she needed until that moment. David raised an eyebrow, pausing his morning routine. "Again? That's the 3rd time this week?" He sighed, running a hand through his neatly combed hair. "What was it this time?" "Same as before, crying, begging not to get on the bus." Emma placed the candy on the counter, watching as David picked it up, turning it over in his hands with mild curiosity. "Buford gave you this?" David asked, examining the wrapper. A smile spread across his face, softening his features. "Good old Buford. He was driving that route when we were kids, remember? He's practically a neighborhood institution. Everyone knows him." He tossed the candy back onto the counter with casual dismissal. Emma watched the small wrapped sweet bounce once before settling on the granite surface. "Did you ever find him, I don't know, odd?" she asked carefully. David laughed, shaking his head. "Buford? No way. He's just one of those career bus drivers, salt of the earth type. He used to let us sit in the driver's seat sometimes after the route was done, show us how the doors worked." He grabbed his travel mug, taking a final sip before securing the lid. "Why? Did he say something?" Emma hesitated, unsure how to articulate her vague unease. Instead, she shifted the conversation slightly. "Mrs. Peterson called yesterday. Tyler was late again. That's the 4th time this month." David shrugged, grabbing his keys from the hook by the door. "Probably just dawdling. You know how he gets distracted," he replied, checking his watch. "Sees a bug or a cool rock, and everything else disappears from his mind." "But the nightmares, David," Emma pressed, following him toward the door. "The bedwetting, and I just talked to Melissa Sanchez at the bus stop. Her son Oscar is having issues too. He's withdrawn, and his grades are dropping. Both boys ride the same bus, and both have been late to class multiple times this month." David sighed, turning to face her with an expression that mixed impatience with condescension. "See? It's just the age. He's not the only one going through this. 1st grade is an adjustment for all of them," he said dismissively. "Kids go through phases. Remember how anxious you were about everything when you were little? Your mom told me all about it. You're transferring your own childhood anxieties to our son." Emma felt her cheeks flush with anger and embarrassment. "This isn't about me," she insisted, her voice rising slightly. "This is about Tyler and the fact that something is clearly wrong. 6-year-olds don't just start having night terrors out of nowhere. They don't regress to bedwetting without a reason. "So what are you suggesting?" David challenged, his own frustration evident. That the school is somehow traumatizing him? That his teacher, who comes with glowing recommendations, is secretly terrorizing the children? Or maybe it's the cafeteria food? "I don't know what it is," Emma exclaimed, throwing her hands up. But a mother knows when something's wrong with her child, and something is definitely wrong with Tyler. David checked his watch again, more pointedly this time. "You treat him like he's still a toddler. He has to grow up sometime, Emma. First grade comes with expectations, homework, sitting still, following directions. Not every child adjusts at the same pace." "First graders shouldn't have pressures that give them nightmares," Emma countered, her voice rising with her frustration. "And it can't be a coincidence that Oscar is having problems too, both boys on the same bus route. If there are issues at school, we need to address them, not dismiss them because they're inconvenient to acknowledge." David's jaw tightened as he checked his watch a third time. "I'm late. We'll talk about this tonight," he said, his tone making it clear the conversation was over. He leaned in to kiss her cheek, the gesture automatic and perfunctory, before heading out the door. The sound of his car starting up and pulling away left Emma in a silence that seemed to amplify her thoughts rather than quiet them. She paced the kitchen, her mind racing. David's dismissal stung, but it also strengthened her resolve. If he wouldn't take Tyler's behavior seriously, she would have to trust her own instincts. The candy on the counter caught her eye again, and she paused, picking it up. Why would a bus driver carry sweets for children? For situations just like this, how often did this happen? How many children had meltdowns on Buford's bus? The candy no longer seemed like a kind gesture, but something more calculated. A tool, perhaps. Emma turned the small sweet over in her hand, her mind connecting dots she hadn't seen before. The late arrivals to school, which both Tyler and Oscar experienced. The nightmares. The sudden fear of school. No, not school, she realized with growing clarity. The fear wasn't about school itself, it was about the journey to get there. Something didn't add up, and Emma was determined to find out what it was. Emma decided to take action, grabbing her purse and car keys. She couldn't ignore her instincts any longer. Something was wrong, and she needed answers. The drive to Westfield Elementary took only 10 minutes, the familiar route passing by neighborhood parks and small businesses. She rehearsed what she'd say to the principal, trying to sound concerned, but not accusatory. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles turning white as she mentally sorted through the confusing pieces of Tyler's behavior, the bus driver's candy, and her conversation with Melissa. She wouldn't be dismissed or patronized this time. Her child's well-being was at stake. The school secretary looked up as Emma entered the front office, the smell of disinfectant and children's art supplies hanging in the air. "I'd like to see Principal Martinez about my son, Tyler Wilson," Emma said, hands fidgeting with her purse strap. The secretary nodded and made a quick call, then directed Emma down the hallway to a door with Principal stenciled in black letters across frosted glass. The hallway walls were lined with student artwork and achievement certificates, cheerful reminders of the normal, healthy environment the school was supposed to provide. The normalcy made Emma doubt herself momentarily. Was she overreacting to typical childhood behavior? Principal Martinez rose from behind her desk when Emma entered, extending her hand with a practiced smile. "Mrs. Wilson, what brings you in today?" she asked, gesturing to a chair across from her desk. Emma sat, suddenly feeling like she was the one in trouble. "I'm concerned about Tyler," she began, outlining the bedwetting, nightmares, and his fierce resistance to the school bus. "And he's been arriving late to class. I received a call from Mrs. Peterson yesterday," Emma added. Her voice sounded steadier than she felt, the words tumbling out with growing urgency as she recounted the signs of distress Tyler had been exhibiting. The principal's expression shifted from polite interest to slight concern. "Yes, I'm aware of Tyler's tardiness issues," she confirmed, pulling up his file on her computer. "The late arrivals have become quite regular, at least once a week for the past month." When Emma suggested that perhaps the school bus had been running behind schedule, Principal Martinez shook her head firmly. "That's not possible, Mrs. Wilson. All our buses have GPS tracking systems that monitor their exact location and arrival times. I can assure you, Bus 17 has been arriving at its scheduled time every day." She turned her computer screen to show Emma a log of precisely documented arrival times. The digital evidence stared back at Emma, undermining her theory with cold, hard data that left no room for interpretation. Emma felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. Without the bus to blame, Tyler's tardiness became harder to explain. I don't understand, then," she stammered, suddenly questioning herself. Maybe David was right. Maybe it was just first-grade jitters, as he suggested. "Tyler used to love school," she said lamely, her earlier conviction wavering under the principal's authoritative gaze. The confidence that propelled her to the school began to crack, replaced by a creeping sense of self-doubt. She shifted in her seat, suddenly feeling like an over-anxious mother making a fuss over nothing. Principal Martinez's expression softened slightly. "Mrs. Wilson, adjustment difficulties are common at this age. The transition to a more structured academic environment can be challenging for some children." Her words echoed David's dismissals so closely that Emma almost believed them. The principal continued, "We can schedule an evaluation with our school counselor if you'd like, but in my experience, these behaviors usually resolve themselves as the child adapts." Her tone was kind but carried an undercurrent of professional authority that made Emma feel foolish for suggesting anything might be amiss with the bus or school procedures. Emma nodded woodenly, thanking the principal for her time. As she walked through the hallway toward the exit, she felt deflated, her maternal instincts warring with the logical explanations she'd been given. The school felt normal, with children's laughter echoing from classrooms and colorful artwork lining the walls. She began to doubt herself. Was she being overprotective, making mountains out of molehills, as David suggested? The sounds of a functioning elementary school surrounded her, a teacher's voice leading a reading lesson, the clatter of chairs in a classroom, the squeak of the custodian's cart on the polished floor. Nothing seemed out of place. As Emma pushed through the front doors into the bright midday sun, movement in the parking lot caught her eye. Children were filing out of the school toward the playground for lunch recess, teachers monitoring their lines. Through the chain-link fence, something made her pause. A heavy-set man in a blue shirt was holding a small boy's hand, leading him not toward the playground, but away from the school grounds. The child's bright red polo shirt and sandy blonde hair were unmistakable, even from this distance. She only caught a glimpse for a brief moment before they disappeared around a corner, but her heart recognized what her mind could barely process. Tyler, her son. And the man, that broad back, the distinct gait, looked unmistakably like Buford. Emma froze mid-step, her breath catching in her throat as maternal recognition overrode all rational thought. Her son, who should have been in class, was leaving school grounds with Buford, the bus driver who had no business being at the school during the middle of the day. She jumped into action, sprinting across the school's front lawn toward the corner where they disappeared. Her heart pounded against her ribs, each beat accompanied by a silent plea. "Please let me be wrong. Please let it be someone else." The gravel crunched under her feet as she ran, her purse slapping against her hip with each desperate stride. As she rounded the corner, breathless from both exertion and fear, Emma saw a yellow school bus pulling away from a side entrance she hadn't noticed before. The brake lights flashed briefly as the vehicle accelerated, turning onto the service road that ran behind the school. Without hesitation, Emma sprinted to her car, fumbling with her keys as she slid behind the wheel. Her hands trembled so violently she had to make 2 attempts to insert the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life, and she pulled out of the parking space with a screech of tires, drawing startled looks from teachers supervising the playground nearby. Emma kept her eyes fixed on the yellow bus now turning onto the service road, her knuckles white as she gripped the steering wheel. Every maternal instinct screamed that her son was in danger, and nothing else mattered but reaching him in time. The service road was narrow and poorly maintained, with potholes and gravel sections that made Emma's car bounce and rattle as she followed at what she hoped was a discreet distance. Dust rose from the bus's tires, creating a hazy trail that made it difficult to see at times. The road curved through a sparse grove of trees, the branches occasionally scraping against the sides of her car as she navigated the tight passage. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably less than 2 minutes, the road opened to a small clearing where a white camper van with gray stripes sat parked. The vehicle looked weathered, but well-maintained, partially concealed from the main road by the surrounding trees. The bus pulled alongside the camper and stopped, its engine still running. Emma quickly parked her car behind a cluster of trees about 50 yards away, cutting the engine and sitting in horrified silence as she watched the scene unfold through her windshield. The bus door opened with a hydraulic hiss that she could almost hear despite the distance. Buford stepped off the bus, his large frame unmistakable even from this far away. Behind him, looking small and vulnerable, came Tyler. Emma's breath caught in her throat as she watched Buford lead her son by the hand toward the camper door. Tyler's posture was stiff, his steps reluctant as Buford's large hand engulfed his small one. Emma felt her entire body go cold as they climbed the metal steps into the camper. The door closed behind them with a finality that sent ice through her veins. Emma's mind raced with terrible possibilities as she stared at the white camper, now containing her son and a man she'd trusted simply because he'd been a fixture in the community. Why would the bus driver bring Tyler to this isolated location during school hours? What could possibly be happening behind that closed door? Her hands shook as she pulled her phone from her purse and dialed 911, nearly dropping the device in her haste. Each ring seemed to last an eternity before a calm, professional voice answered. "Emergency services, what's your emergency?" "I need help," Emma gasped into the phone, her voice breaking with fear and urgency. "My son, I think he's been kidnapped. The school bus driver took him from school. I followed them. They're in some kind of camper van now. Please, you have to hurry." The dispatcher's voice remained steady, a stabilizing force amid Emma's panic. "Ma'am, I need you to take a deep breath and tell me your name and location." Emma forced herself to inhale. "My name is Emma Wilson. I'm on some kind of service road behind Westfield Elementary School. There's a yellow school bus parked next to a white camper van with gray stripes. My son Tyler is in there with the bus driver, and he shouldn't be." "How old is your son, Mrs. Wilson?" "6. He's only 6 years old," Emma replied, her voice catching. "The bus driver is a man named Buford. I watched him take Tyler off the bus and into the camper. This isn't normal. This isn't right." The dispatcher continued asking questions, trying to guide Emma through her fragmented responses, extracting crucial details from her panicked account. "Officers are being dispatched to your location right now, Mrs. Wilson. Are you in a safe place? Can you be seen from the camper or the bus?" "I'm parked behind some trees. I don't think they can see me," Emma said, her eyes never leaving the camper door. "Please tell them to hurry. I don't know what's happening in there." "The officers are on their way, but I need you to stay on the line with me. More importantly, I need you to stay in your vehicle. Do not approach the camper or the bus. Do you understand? This could be a dangerous situation, and we need you to remain safe until help arrives." Emma mumbled agreement, though every maternal instinct screamed at her to run to the camper and get her son. The dispatcher continued speaking soothingly, asking about Tyler, about what Emma had observed, about any other details she could provide. Each second felt like an eternity as Emma watched the silent camper, imagining what might be happening inside. Then she heard it, Tyler's voice, frightened and high-pitched, carrying faintly through the thin walls of the camper. The sound sent a chill down Emma's spine. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Fear. "I can hear my son," Emma said, cutting off the dispatcher mid-sentence. "He sounds scared. I can hear him through the walls." "Mrs. Wilson, the officers are just minutes away. Please stay in your—" But Emma had already dropped the phone onto the passenger seat, maternal instinct overriding all caution and reason. She flung open her car door and ran toward the camper, her footsteps crunching on the gravel of the service road. Her heart pounded in her chest, blood rushing in her ears as she approached the vehicle containing her son. Without hesitation, Emma pounded on the camper door with her fist, making the entire vehicle shake with the force of her fury and fear. "Buford! Open this door right now," she demanded, her voice stronger and steadier than she felt. There was a moment of absolute silence, then shuffling sounds from inside the camper. Drawers closing, whispered words she couldn't quite make out. The door swung open suddenly, revealing a startled Buford, his heavy-set frame filling the narrow doorway. His shirt was untucked on one side, his face flushed with what might have been surprise or something else entirely. "Mrs. Wilson!" he exclaimed, his eyebrows rising in apparent shock. "What are you doing here?" He attempted to block her view inside with his body, shifting to stand more firmly in the doorway. "Where is my son?" Emma demanded, trying to see past Buford's substantial frame. "Now, Mrs. Wilson, there's been a misunderstanding," Buford began, his voice taking on a placating tone that only fueled Emma's fury. She pushed past him with a strength she didn't know she possessed, the adrenaline of maternal protection giving her the force needed to move the much larger man aside. She gasped when she saw Tyler sitting on a small bench built into the wall of the camper. Tears streamed down his face, his bright red polo shirt rumpled and untucked. His expression when he saw her was a mixture of relief and shame that broke Emma's heart. "Tyler, come here right now," she called, arms outstretched toward her son. Tyler bolted from the bench and ran to her, wrapping his arms around her waist and sobbing into her shirt. The smell of his shampoo, the apple-scented one he'd picked himself at the grocery store last week, mingled with something sickly sweet in the camper. Emma's eyes darted around the small space, taking in details with the heightened awareness of fear. Candy wrappers littered a small table. A digital camera sat on a shelf above what looked like a narrow bed. Curtains were drawn across the camper windows, blocking outside light. Buford raised his hands defensively, stepping between Emma and the door to prevent their exit. "This isn't what it looks like," he insisted, his voice steady, but his eyes darting nervously between Emma and the service road outside. "Tyler wasn't feeling well. I was just helping him out. I was going to take him back to school as soon as he felt better." "Move away from the door," Emma commanded, one arm wrapped protectively around Tyler, the other reaching for her phone, which she realized too late was still in her car. "Mrs. Wilson, you're overreacting," Buford said, his voice taking on an edge. "This is a simple misunderstanding. I've been driving kids for 20 years. Parents trust me." Emma was preparing to physically fight her way past Buford when she heard voices approaching outside, firm, authoritative voices calling commands. Relief flooded through her as she recognized what the voices meant. The 911 dispatcher had acted quickly. Two police officers appeared at the edge of the trees, weapons drawn as they advanced cautiously toward the camper. "Police! Step away from the door!" an officer commanded, moving steadily closer. Buford's face drained of color as he saw them, his hands slowly rising above his head as he moved away from Emma and Tyler. More sirens wailed in the distance, signaling the approach of additional units. Emma clutched Tyler to her side, her body positioned between him and Buford as the officers reached the camper steps. One officer kept his weapon trained on Buford while the other approached Emma. "Ma'am, are you and the boy all right?" the officer asked, his eyes quickly scanning them for visible injuries. Emma nodded, unable to form words past the lump in her throat. Tyler pressed his face harder against her side, his small body still trembling with silent sobs. "Take them both out of here," the first officer instructed his partner, never taking his eyes off Buford. "Get them to safety while we secure the scene." As the second officer gently guided Emma and Tyler away from the camper, Emma felt her knees weaken with relief and delayed shock. They had found Tyler in time, but what exactly had they interrupted, and how long had it been going on? "This is all a misunderstanding," Buford protested loudly as an officer approached him with handcuffs ready. "I was helping the boy. He wasn't feeling well at school. Ask him yourself." Despite his protests, his face had taken on a sickly pallor, beads of sweat forming on his forehead as the officer firmly guided his hands behind his back. Emma stood on the gravel road, holding Tyler so tightly against her that she could feel his rapid heartbeat against her side. She positioned herself as a physical barrier between her son and Buford, watching with grim satisfaction as the officer secured the handcuffs with a definitive click. More police vehicles arrived, their lights reflecting off the white surface of the camper in blue and red flashes. Officers emerged, some setting up a perimeter around the area, others approaching the camper with purposeful steps. Emma recognized a detective badge on an approaching officer, a middle-aged woman with short dark hair and eyes that missed nothing. The female officer knelt down to Tyler's level, her movement deliberate and non-threatening. "Hi there," she said, her voice gentle but not condescending. "My name is Officer Lacey. What's your name?" Tyler pressed himself harder against Emma, his face half hidden in the fabric of her shirt. "Tyler," he whispered, the word barely audible. Officer Lacey nodded, maintaining a respectful distance. "Tyler, that's a great name. Can you tell me what happened today? Why were you in this camper with Mr. Buford?" Tyler stared at his shoes, his small body trembling visibly against Emma. The silence stretched for several seconds, broken only by the crackle of police radios and the distant sound of birds in the trees. Emma held her breath, unsure if Tyler would speak at all. When he finally did, his voice was so quiet that Emma and Officer Lacey had to lean closer to hear him. "He wanted to take pictures of me without my shirt," Tyler whispered, the words tumbling out as if he'd held them inside too long. "He does it every time he takes me from school. He said the candies were special, and I had to pay him back by keeping secrets." Emma felt her knees weaken as Tyler continued, his voice breaking with emotion. "He said if I told anyone, they'd think I was a bad boy and no one would love me anymore. That's why I couldn't tell you, Mommy. I didn't want you to stop loving me." Officer Lacey's expression remained professionally neutral, but Emma caught the flicker of controlled anger in her eyes as she exchanged a knowing glance with her colleagues. The officer's voice betrayed none of this emotion when she spoke again to Tyler, keeping her tone reassuring. "Tyler, you did nothing wrong, nothing at all, and your mom still loves you very much. I can tell just by the way she's holding you right now." Across the clearing, Buford's protests grew louder as another officer read him his rights. "This is preposterous," he shouted, struggling against the restraints. "I've been driving for this district for 20 years. Everyone knows me. You can't seriously believe I would harm a child." His face had turned from pale to mottled red, spittle flying from his mouth as he shouted. Emma turned Tyler away from the sight, shielding him from Buford's increasingly desperate protests. The bus driver continued shouting as officers led him to a patrol car, his voice carrying across the clearing. "I was helping him. He wasn't feeling well. This is a mistake." Officer Lacey stood, nodding to a colleague who approached with a gentle smile. "Mrs. Wilson, Officer Vaughn is going to take you and Tyler to a separate patrol car. We need to get both of you away from here." As Officer Vaughn guided them toward a waiting police vehicle, Emma glanced back at the camper. Other officers were donning latex gloves, preparing to enter the vehicle. The methodical, practiced way they moved told Emma this wasn't their first time handling such a scene. The realization made her stomach clench with nausea. Through the open door of the camper, Emma glimpsed an officer emerging with something in his gloved hand. He spoke quietly to a colleague, his expression grim as he held up what appeared to be a digital camera. Another officer brought out what looked like a school backpack, not Tyler's, which was still presumably at school. The backpack was smaller, with a cartoon character Emma didn't recognize. Her mind reeled with the implications. "Mrs. Wilson, please," Officer Vaughn said gently, guiding her attention away from the scene. "Let's get you and Tyler somewhere quiet." Emma nodded numbly, helping Tyler into the back seat of the patrol car. His body was still trembling, though less violently now. He looked exhausted, the adrenaline crash leaving him pale and drained. Officer Lacey approached the car window, her expression serious but kind. "We're going to need both of you to come to the station for formal statements," she explained. "It's important we document everything while the details are fresh, especially for Tyler." Emma nodded, struggling to process everything happening around them. "Of course," she managed. "Whatever you need." As Officer Lacey turned to speak with a colleague, Tyler looked up at Emma with red-rimmed eyes. "Can we go home now?" he asked, his voice small and tired. "I want to go home." Emma brushed his hair back from his forehead, her heart breaking at the simple request she couldn't yet fulfill. "Soon, baby. We need to help the police first, then we'll go home. I promise." The patrol car pulled away from the scene, tires crunching on gravel as they turned onto the service road. Through the rear window, Emma could see more officers arriving, evidence technicians setting up equipment near the camper. The school bus, that familiar yellow vehicle that should have represented safety, now looked ominous, surrounded by police vehicles, its lights flashing silently in the growing chaos. Emma held Tyler close as they drove away, her mind racing with questions she wasn't sure she wanted answered. How long had this been happening? How many other children had Buford targeted? And how had all of them, missed the signs for so long? The ride to the police station seemed endless, each turn and traffic signal stretching time in a way that made minutes feel like hours. Emma kept her arm wrapped protectively around Tyler's shoulders, occasionally murmuring reassurances when she felt him tense beside her. The police officer driving them, Officer Vaughn, maintained a respectful silence, glancing at them in the rearview mirror with understanding eyes. At the station, they were led to a small interview room with beige walls and institutional furniture that attempted comfort but achieved only functionality. A box of tissues sat on the table alongside a pitcher of water and plastic cups. Tyler refused to leave Emma's side, climbing onto her lap as soon as she sat down in one of the padded chairs. A social worker named Ms. Jenkins joined them, her gentle demeanor and soft voice clearly practiced for situations involving traumatized children. She explained to Tyler that they would need to ask him some questions, but he could take breaks whenever he needed, and his mom would stay with him the whole time. While they waited for the detective, Emma called David, her voice breaking as she explained what had happened. His initial disbelief came through clearly in his shocked silence. "What do you mean Buford took him to a camper?" David asked, his voice rising with each word. "That doesn't make any sense. Buford's been driving buses forever. Everyone knows him." "David, I saw it with my own eyes," Emma replied, her voice steadier than she expected. "I followed them. Tyler was in that camper with him. The police have arrested Buford, and they're gathering evidence right now." There was a long pause before David spoke again, his voice smaller now. "Emma, I didn't believe you this morning. I dismissed everything you were worried about." "I know," Emma said simply, too emotionally drained for anger or accusations. "I'm on my way," David said, guilt evident in his voice. "I'll be there as soon as I can." After ending the call, Emma sat quietly with Tyler, stroking his hair as the social worker prepared some drawing materials for him. Tyler's shoulders gradually relaxed under Emma's touch, though his eyes remained wary each time the door opened. The school principal, Principal Martinez, arrived at the station looking visibly shaken, her normally impeccable appearance marred by worry lines and hastily applied lipstick. Detective Morris, who introduced himself as the lead investigator, brought her into the room where Emma waited. "This is impossible," Principal Martinez told the detective, shaking her head in disbelief. "All our buses have GPS tracking. We would have known if the bus wasn't on its designated route. The system alerts us if a bus stops anywhere unexpected for more than 3 minutes." Detective Morris shook his head grimly, consulting the notes on his tablet. "Buford tampered with the GPS unit on his bus," he explained. "Our tech team did a preliminary examination. He installed a simple electronic switch that let him temporarily disable the GPS signal while keeping the unit in place." Principal Martinez's face paled as Morris continued. "The system would still show the bus at its last reported location, making it appear stationary at a school or designated stop. He'd then reconnect it before returning to his normal route." The detective's voice was matter-of-fact, but his eyes reflected disgust at the calculated nature of the deception. "We never would have caught it without a physical inspection of the unit," he added. "It was professionally installed, hidden behind the dashboard panel. This wasn't amateur work." Principal Martinez glanced at Emma, her shoulders slumped with defeat, her eyes quickly dropping to the floor, unable to meet the gaze of the mother whose concerns she had so easily dismissed. "How long?" Emma asked Detective Morris, her voice barely above a whisper. "How long has he been doing this?" Detective Morris exchanged a glance with the social worker before answering carefully. "We're still early in the investigation, Mrs. Wilson, but based on what we've found so far, this has been going on for some time, possibly years." The detective turned his tablet screen toward Emma and the principal, showing school attendance records for Tyler and several other children. "Your son wasn't just being taken during lunch breaks," he explained gently. "Buford would sometimes keep Tyler and other children on the bus during morning drop-offs, drive to the camper, and then deliver them to school late." Emma studied the screen, recognizing a pattern she should have seen weeks ago. The late arrivals recorded in the school system matched exactly with the days when Tyler's anxiety had been at its worst. The children were instructed to tell their teachers they were late for various innocuous reasons: doctor's appointments, traffic, oversleeping, Morris continued. Given their ages, the teachers had no reason to question these explanations, especially since the tardiness was intermittent rather than daily and spread across different children. Emma's hands trembled as she processed this information. All those mornings when Tyler had begged not to go to school, all those late arrivals, she had completely missed what was happening. "What about the other children?" Principal Martinez asked, her professional composure cracking. "How many are we talking about?" "We're still compiling a list," Morris replied. "We're cross-referencing the bus route with tardiness records and behavioral reports from teachers. Right now, we're looking at potentially 8 to 10 children, but that number may change as we investigate further." As Emma sat processing this information, the station door burst open, and Melissa Sanchez rushed in with her son Oscar clinging to her hand. Melissa's face was pale with panic, her normally tidy hair escaping its ponytail in disarray. She froze when she spotted Emma across the room, recognition and horror dawning in her eyes simultaneously. "I heard what happened," she said, her voice trembling as she approached. "A parent from the bus route called me, and I remembered our conversation this morning." She pulled Oscar closer to her side, the boy's eyes downcast and shoulders hunched in a posture Emma now recognized all too well. "After I got the call, I sat down with Oscar and asked him some careful questions. He broke down crying and told me about what Buford had been doing." Oscar, a small boy with dark curly hair and solemn eyes, clung to his mother, nodding silently to confirm her words. Detective Morris's expression hardened with grim determination as he quickly arranged for another interview room and social worker, knowing each new victim would strengthen their case against Buford. As the evening progressed, the police station filled with more concerned parents from the same bus route. Each family arrived with the same shocked expression, the same questions, and increasingly, the same horrible confirmations from their children. Emma watched through the interview room window as families arrived, feeling a mixture of relief that Tyler wasn't the only victim and profound sadness for the same reason. The detective returned to Emma, his expression grim but satisfied. With the evidence we've collected and multiple victims already coming forward, Buford is looking at decades behind bars, he explained, keeping his voice low. Cases like these carry heavy sentences, especially with the premeditation we've uncovered. He glanced at Tyler, who sat quietly on a nearby chair with a blanket wrapped around his shoulders, then back to Emma. "You did this," he told her quietly, respect evident in his tone. "Your instinct to follow that bus likely saved more than just your son today." Emma nodded, too emotionally drained to feel any satisfaction from the praise. She had saved Tyler today, but where had her instincts been all the other days when he'd been suffering in silence? Detective Morris finished debriefing Emma, his weathered face showing both exhaustion and determination after hours of coordinating the rapidly expanding investigation. He closed his notebook with a soft snap, tucking it into his jacket pocket. "Mrs. Wilson, because of your actions today, we've already identified 4 other children affected by Buford's predatory behavior. There will likely be more," he said, his voice dropping to ensure their conversation remained private despite the bustling activity of the station. Emma nodded silently, her gaze drifting to the interview room where Tyler sat with a child psychologist. Through the window she could see him hunched over a coloring book, his small hand gripping a crayon with such intensity that his knuckles were white. His face was set in concentration that seemed out of place on a 6-year-old. Too serious, too burdened. "We're obtaining search warrants for Buford's home," the detective continued, his voice even lower now. "Based on what we found in the camper, we suspect this has been going on for—" He paused, clearly weighing his words carefully. "A very long time." The implication hung heavy in the air between them. Emma swallowed hard, fighting back a fresh wave of nausea at the thought of how many children might have been victimized over Buford's 20 years as a bus driver. A woman in her mid-40s approached them, her sensible bob framing a face lined with experience rather than age. She wore a navy blue blazer over a simple blouse, a lanyard with ID badge hanging around her neck. Her eyes were kind but assessing as she extended her hand to Emma. "Mrs. Wilson, I'm Dr. Renee Carter from Child Protective Services. I'll be the lead case manager for Tyler and the other children involved." Her handshake was firm, professional, but not without warmth. Emma returned the handshake automatically, suddenly overwhelmed by the realization that this was just the beginning of a long process. The adrenaline that had carried her through the day was beginning to fade, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness and questions she wasn't sure she wanted answered. "What comes next?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She cleared her throat and tried again, needing to know. "Will my son ever be okay again?" The tremble in her voice betrayed the fear she'd been suppressing for hours. Dr. Carter glanced around the crowded station, then gently guided Emma to a more private corner of the waiting area, away from the constant movement of officers and distraught parents. They sat on molded plastic chairs bolted to the floor, an island of relative calm in the chaos. "Children are remarkably resilient, Mrs. Wilson," Dr. Carter said, her tone professional yet warm, a balance earned through years of walking families through their darkest moments. "Tyler will need therapy, both individual sessions and eventually some group work with other children when the time is right. There will be good days and difficult ones." Emma watched through the glass as Tyler showed his drawing to the psychologist, pointing to something on the paper with serious focus. From this distance, she couldn't see what he'd drawn, but the psychologist's gentle nod seemed encouraging. "The most important thing right now," Dr. Carter continued, following Emma's gaze, "is that you found him. You believed him when he didn't even have the words to tell you what was happening. Many children in these situations never get that." Emma turned back to Dr. Carter, tears threatening to spill over. "But I didn't know what was happening," she admitted, the guilt she'd been holding back finally breaking through. "I knew something was wrong, but I had no idea it was this." Dr. Carter leaned forward slightly, her eyes direct and honest. "You know, many children in these situations are never discovered. The predators count on children staying silent through manipulation and fear. They count on parents dismissing behavioral changes, on schools missing the patterns. But you didn't dismiss the changes in Tyler. You followed your instincts despite being told you were overreacting." Before Emma could respond, the station door opened and David arrived, his face ashen and eyes red-rimmed. He scanned the room frantically until he spotted Emma, then rushed to her side. "Where is he? Where's Tyler?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. Emma pointed to the interview room, and David's posture sagged with visible relief when he saw their son, safe and seemingly calm. He ran a hand through his hair, which was uncharacteristically disheveled. "Mr. Wilson," Dr. Carter interrupted gently, standing to introduce herself. "I'm Dr. Carter from CPS. Your son is with one of our child psychologists right now. They're just finishing up some preliminary assessment work to help us understand what Tyler needs going forward." David shook her hand distractedly, his eyes continually drawn back to the interview room. "Can I see him? Can we take him home tonight?" "Yes to both," Dr. Carter assured him. "The psychologist will bring him out shortly, and Detective Morris has already told me you're free to take Tyler home once the paperwork is finished. We'll be scheduling follow-up appointments starting tomorrow." The next hour passed in a blur of paperwork and gentle questioning. Detective Morris returned periodically with updates on the investigation, which was expanding rapidly as more officers were assigned to the case. Dr. Carter explained the support services available to Tyler and their family, including counseling options and victim advocacy programs. Emma felt physically and emotionally drained as she signed form after form, her handwriting growing progressively shakier. Tyler remained with David, barely letting go of his father's hand as they answered a few final, carefully worded questions from another officer. When Detective Morris finally confirmed they could take Tyler home, Emma felt a rush of relief wash over her. "We'll need to speak with Tyler again tomorrow," he explained, handing Emma his card. "But for now, take him home and try to maintain as normal a routine as possible. Familiar surroundings and regular activities will help him feel secure again." Emma nodded gratefully, tucking the card into her purse alongside the business cards from Dr. Carter and the victim advocate. David lifted an exhausted Tyler into his arms, the boy's head resting heavily on his father's shoulder. Emma gathered their belongings, her movements mechanical as fatigue settled deep into her muscles. The drive home was silent, street lights casting rhythmic patterns of light and shadow across their faces. Emma turned in her seat occasionally to check on Tyler, who had fallen asleep almost immediately after David had buckled him into his booster seat. His face looked peaceful in sleep, the worry lines that had aged him beyond his years temporarily smoothed away. As they pulled into their driveway, Emma recalled the candy still sitting on their kitchen counter from this morning, a small, innocent-looking wrapper that had been the first tangible sign of something sinister. A lifetime seemed to have passed since she'd put it there, questioning but uncertain. She made a silent promise to always trust her instincts where her child was concerned, to never again ignore the subtle signs that something was wrong. Behind them, more police cars headed toward the school, their lights flashing silently in the growing darkness as the true scope of what Buford had done began to unfold. In the back seat, Tyler stirred slightly, his eyes fluttering open for a moment. "Mommy?" he murmured, his voice thick with sleep. "Are we home?" "Yes, baby," Emma replied softly, reaching back to touch his knee. "We're home, and you're safe now." As David carried their sleeping son into the house, Emma paused on the front porch, looking back at the quiet street where the bus had stopped this morning. The neighborhood looked exactly the same, peaceful, ordinary, safe. But everything had changed. The journey ahead would not be easy, but they would face it together, one step at a time. And she would never again silence the voice inside her that recognized when something was wrong with her child, no matter who told her she was overreacting.